So I have some thanks that I want to say. So I want to say a big thanks to the Loft Literary Center. For the past 2 years, I've been involved here taking classes and volunteering, and now with the Mentor Series, and it has been an amazing 2 years. If you've thought about getting involved with the Loft, I really recommend it. And of course, I want to thank all of our mentors, and especially Marisha, who's reading next, and all of my fellow mentees that are here. And of course, Sherry Fernandez-Williams, who is ever gracious in her efforts to organize us. So like Sherry said, I've been working on a memoir about hitchhiking on sailboats. I spent 3 years doing that. And I'm going to read you the beginning of a story that, like Sherry said, I'm pretty excited, was published in Creative Nonfiction. So it's the current issue that's out right now. And the reason that I'm so excited, or one of them, is that the very first book that I ever read when I thought maybe I wanted to write creative nonfiction was by Lee Gutkind. It's called The Art of Creative Nonfiction, and Lee Gutkind is the founding member of this magazine. It's exciting. So the story is called The Good Captain. And I read a version of this when it was in process, so it might be familiar to some of you. The Good Captain. When the sea is calm, every ship has a good captain. Sailing proverb. I watched the sleeping ocean from a corner of the cockpit. In the deep darkness, blind waves broke and collapsed in rhythmic, drawn-out hisses, luring me to sleep as they misted me with spray. Even in sleep, the ocean swell rolled forward, constant, like a shark that never stops swimming. I had felt that I could go on forever too, sailing west without stopping across the great expanse of the Pacific. Then, a few hours before sunset, a faint smudge floated into view amidst the clouds on the horizon. The island, hazy through the atmosphere, marked our entry into Polynesian waters. Sighting land awakened in me dormant memories. Limitless fresh water, a bed that didn't move, the quiet pleasure of a walk. Having sailed day and night for 3 weeks, I'd already spent the time I wanted with the open ocean. Seeing land had me starved for landfall, but the distant island was not a port of entry, and we could not lawfully stop there. We had to carry on. We still had 1 more night till our destination. We were headed for Nukuhiva, a dead volcano thousands of miles from any continent. I still had 3 hours and 27 minutes before Chet would relieve me from my watch. After dawn, we'd trade places, and I'd flop into one of the bunks he and I and Cyril, the other hitchhiking crew member, all shared, the cushion still warm from his body. In the meantime, I stared down the sky. On night watch, the very real but unlikely possibility of annihilation is balanced against total boredom. I watched for signs of changing weather or a ship's light on the horizon. A 900-foot container ship cruises at around 30 nautical miles an hour with minimal crew to keep costs down. On autopilot, the captain literally asleep at the wheel. A container ship could run us down without ever knowing it had hit us. In the groping dark, inky cumulus clouds were assembling behind us along the eastern horizon. The clouds could have been nothing, an annoying obstacle between me and the sunrise, or they could have been a squall, a localized storm. Without a moon, I couldn't tell. I could barely see the clouds, gobs of black in an even blacker sky. A squall could bring strong winds, threatening to tear sails, break rigging. We couldn't afford breakages so far from help. I turned away from the horizon and closed my eyes to relieve the painful pressure behind them, exhausted from straining into the night. I just wanted an easy final watch. I didn't want the hassle of deciding whether or not the clouds were going to coalesce into a squall, if in fact a localized storm was on the horizon. The trade winds would blow it on top of us. Then I'd need to determine if we could ride it out or if I needed to wake the captain. And waking the captain was the last thing I wanted to do. Chet didn't like to be called captain. He'd told me and Cyril, "I don't want to create a weird dynamic. We're all just part of the crew." Once, after he said some unusually appointed request, I said as a joke, "All right, Cap." Cyril winked at me, but Chet cringed and went below without saying anything. Still, on night watch by myself, when I needed to decide whether or not to wake the one person who charted our course, who rebuilt and rewired every inch of this boat, his boat, the one person ultimately in charge, I thought of him as captain. And for the most part, he was right. We were all just part of the crew. But as the newest member, I felt I had to prove myself. I knew Chet trusted me, but he trusted Cyril more. Cyril had joined the boat 3 months and 300 miles before me. While I milled about, gearing up the gumption to ask Chet what needed doing, there was Cyril coming down the dock with a chipper smile and a cart full of potable water jugs, anticipating our need to top up the fresh water tanks before Chet even asked. Cyril was Johnny on the goddamn spot, and a valuable member of the 3-person team we had fast become. Still, I wanted to be first among equals. I had connected with Chet, and by extension Cyril, through Latitude 38's online crew list. Other boats had dismissed me, saying they wanted young, strapping, they didn't explicitly say the word male, crew to help with heavy lifting. Those boats that did welcome me aboard wanted a cook and a maid, often asking if I would be open to a relationship. One captain, old enough to be my grandfather, declared himself a balding sex machine. Chet, thankfully, just wanted me to sail the boat. He was impressed that a 26-year-old had a decade of sailing experience, and I had a lot more if you counted the years I captained my childhood home, a 50-foot sailboat, from the safety of my father's lap. Chet and I emailed, Skyped, checked references, until there was nothing left for me to do but fly down to Mexico for a get-to-know-you sail. Since that first night passage, along the coast of Jalisco, the guys had trusted me to stand watch while they rested below. First light glowed indigo on a distant edge of the horizon, while the clouds bled into a continuous line. Every 15 minutes, it was time to look again. If I saw a ship on the horizon 10 miles away, closing half a sea mile a minute, I would have 20 minutes to determine if we were on a convergent course, devise a plan of action, and alter our heading to avoid a possible collision. I stood to scan the horizon, and the cloud line behind us, now a fully fortified rampart, startled me with its height and solidity. I leaned closer. Beneath the cloud line loomed the darkest corner of the sky. Pushed by a following wind and fast approaching, the clouds would soon be on us. I circled my ankles, flexed my calves, and checked the self-steering wind vane, keeping us on course. Stops was steering itself. All in order, I took one last look and went below. At the nav station, I turned on the radar as the deck lurched out from under my feet, and I stumbled backward, disoriented. A large swell rolled under Stop's hull, and I grabbed at the edge of the chart table to keep from falling across the cabin, then leaned back hard in the opposite direction as the counter roll tried to throw me into the radar. That was a big one. Pay attention. If I let myself forget where I was, I could break a rib being flung across the cabin. Embarrassed, despite the lack of observers, I shook off the large swell, assuming it to be the tallest wave in the set, and pulled myself toward the radar. I didn't consider, perhaps chose to ignore, a fact I knew. Big waves are often pushed by big winds. On the radar screen, large green blotches, marred with red, announced squall clouds with a lot of rain. In the last few weeks, I'd sailed through more squalls than years I'd been alive, and still I didn't know what to make of this one. Sizable lakes of green and red pooled 20 miles wide on the radar screen. We had double reefed at dusk, significantly reducing our sail area to ride out the inevitable squalls. The only reason I would need to wake the captain was if the winds were going to be so strong that we needed to shorten sail even further. The radar, whose radio waves echoed off rain but not wind, couldn't tell me either. The captain lay a few feet from me in the salon, and I let my eyes wander over his sleeping body. Chet was curled on his side in gray checkered boxers, limp on top of his white sheet, unable to tell me what he wanted. The thought occurred to me, maybe he isn't really asleep. If he wasn't sleeping, I reasoned, I wouldn't technically be waking him. But the steady rise and fall of his white t-shirt confirmed he was asleep. I sat there at the nav station in the captain's chair, watching him. A week before, we had sailed across the equator. Crossing the equator is a maritime rite of passage that transformed me forever from a pollywog or a rookie into a shellback or an experienced sailor. I believed in tests of willpower and skill, and the possibility of arriving on the other side, stronger, wiser, truer, somebody different, somebody new. A person could cross a line that meant she had gained enough experience to know the answers in difficult situations. I believed I'd already arrived at the other side, and I loathed myself for not knowing what to do. The squall felt like a test whose sole purpose was to humiliate me. If I were a better sailor, I thought, I would be able to reef single-handed, to handle this on my own. The waves were gathering force, and to keep from falling, I crawled on all fours back up the companionway ladder. All around me in the dim morning, more night than day, the gray surface of the ocean throbbed rhythmically, the pulse of waves visible only as movement. I couldn't see their height, but I could feel them growing. Big winds, I allowed myself to remember. If only the squall could wait till Chet's watch. As the only girl on board stops, I didn't want to sound the alarm unless I had a good reason. I had to divine the true nature of the squall, as well as the moment when the captain wanted me to wake him, if it got bad. Too early, and I was afraid he'd be angry, lose respect for me. Too late, and we'd be in trouble. I could feel the squall's power even before it reached us. The steady wind speed hit 30 knots, and gusts struck with surprising force. The sea around stops heaped up as the wind tore the foaming tops off waves in white streaks. On land, this wind would throw whole trees into motion. Adrenaline flamed in my veins. I had to wake Chet. How could I have waited this long? In the muffled quiet below deck, I crept toward Chet, trying not to disturb Cyril, even as the stiff crinkle of my foul weather gear rustled to a roar. I shook Chet's shoulder. He pushed up his sleeping mask. Have we reached Nukuhiva? Chet's instant lucidity made me wonder if he'd been sleeping at all. Maybe Stop's increasingly agitated motion had woken him, or maybe he'd been laying awake, anticipating landfall. I need your help. Chet leapt from his bunk. Though thick clouds blotted out the dawn, the squall was now clearly visible. Massive gray clouds stretched in a formidable front as far as I could see in either direction. Beneath this advancing army, winds beat the sea into a fury, a few hundred yards behind us. Chet's large eyes widened as he took in the mega squall. The acid taste of imagined insults was on my tongue. What's wrong with you? Why didn't you wake me sooner? Chet's eyebrows pursed together, then fell back. Let's reef. You got the wind vane? For the captain, only our safety mattered. With a hand on the wind vane's thin control lines, I steered Stops into the wind to take the full burden off the sails. I braced my feet as the boat slammed headlong into oncoming waves. The mainsail swung close above my head, whipping itself in the wind, each crack of canvas cutting through me like a gunshot. No longer caught in the hand of the wind, the boat's machinery was a loose-flung thing, predictable only up to a point. Chet threw himself about the winch, grinding down the mainsail even further, then folded and secured the sail. On his mark, I turned us downwind. Practice had made us good at this. Without saying a word, Chet took the helm from me, unhitching the wind vane to steer by hand. Then a long, high-pitched cry let loose from the sky, and the squall hit. Strong winds blew seawater skyward, and forced rain sideways, slantways, anyways but down. A gust of wind tried to push the boat over, but 6,000 pounds of ballast and Stop's keel kept us upright. If we hadn't shortened sail, the gusts could have knocked us down, slamming the boat on its side, the cockpit pitched vertical, the sails pushed all the way down against the waves. Thanks.